This is your friendly neighborhood author, Jonathan, and you are listening to Season 5 of the Floor Rejects podcast, The Isle of Artemisia. Welcome back to the Floor Rejects podcast. This is your friendly neighborhood author, Jonathan. If you're new here, every week I read you a story, basically a chapter that I've written the previous week. And this month or year or season, whatever it is the Isle of Artemisia. Last week, our characters, we really only followed Anaxos and Barrett because they saw a boat in the distance, and Anaxos chased after Barrett when Barrett ran into the sea and just started swimming towards the boat because he was so excited. They snuck up onto the boat as the others also snuck up onto the boat, and Anaxos ended up being confronted by an old flame of his by the name of Elliot, who knocked him out cold, threw him overboard, and then basically gave Barrett no choice but to go in after him. So that's where we're kind of jumping off from this week. Chapter 17, Riptide. As Barrett struggles in the water, thrashing about, his hands land on the searing flesh of Anaxos' back, which had just resurfaced. The man floats face down, arms out to his sides in the wake left by the sailboat that he had been thrown from. "Come here," Barrett sputters, rolling the man's heavy body over in the water, pushing his hair from his face. His eyes were shut, but even with them closed, Barrett could tell they were glowing. That meant he must still be alive. And so, Barrett hooks one hand into the waistband of Anaxos' tattered pants and uses the other one to kick their way to shore. He struggles hard against the water, which is a constant chore. He was sure he would tire out before they made it back to the beach. At some points, he would hear small sounds over the sounds of the water, small moans coming from the man he drug along. He kept at it, paddling with one arm as hard as he could, knowing that if he didn't, they were too far away for help, and the others wouldn't know they needed help until it was too late anyway. He kicks and kicks. His legs burn. His lungs burn. His shoulders ache. He wonders how much longer they had before they reached shore, as he had abandoned keeping his eye out for it, opting to stay face down in the water to conserve his muscle strength. He only came up for air to check that Anaxos was still alive. Finally, his feet hit sand, just as he's sure he'll pass out from exhaustion. "Guys?" Barrett calls out as he pulls Anaxos from the surf. He looks around but sees no one. He realizes quickly that in his effort to get back to shore, his hands paid attention to exactly where they were headed, but not his head, and he had overshot the hut by a long shot. In the distance, ever so faintly, he can see the flickering of their fire, and he shouted as loud as he could, hoping they would hear him. He doesn't dare leave Anaxos, though, who still lay on the beach. Barrett leans down to him, looking hard at him, wondering if there was a way to wake him up. He rears a hand back, bringing it swinging down, but at the last second a hand catches his arm. He looks up, half expecting to see one of his friends to be standing there to stop him, but it wasn't Daniel or Crystal or Nick. It was a stranger. The stranger smiles at him sinisterly, and his eyes begin to pulse green. Anaxos' do as well. "Get off!" Barrett cries, spinning on his heels and kicking out. He strikes at the man's shin, sweeping him off balance and landing hard in the sand, still gripping Barrett's arm. "Come!" the man shouts, and scrambles up to grip Barrett's other hand, his eyes still flashing green. Barrett struggles against him, but knows without anything other than a few fish to eat for days, he was helpless. The man shakes him, pulling him close to examine him with a gaze so intense and intimidating that Barrett thought he might be seeing through him. But then an idea comes to him. He stills, letting the man look him over, staring intently at his face, drawing closer and closer until it was Barrett's turn to smile. The man looked at him confusedly, and Barrett, taking a page from Elliot's playbook, rears back and smashes his forehead into the man's temple. "Fuck!" Barrett yells, his head ringing. The hand gripping him lets go, and the man falls back. Barrett grabs at his forehead, wondering if he had just broken his skull, but mercifully, everything feels okay, save for a lump rapidly forming on his forehead. Soon his vision stops spinning, and he turns to Anaxos again, who is still lying cold on the beach. Barrett reaches back again, and with as much force as he can muster, he slaps Anaxos across the face so hard that the man on the ground convulses. Then he shoots straight up, spitting up more water than Barrett thought was humanly possible. He turns to Barrett after this and gives him a look of abject pain. "We've got to get out of here," Barrett tells him intently, gesturing at the other man, and he was beginning to come to already, his arms and fingers twitching. Anaxos stares at him, his eyes coming back into focus as he remembers the events of the past hour. "Who is he?" Anaxos asks. "He tried to grab me. Come on," Barrett explains, and Anaxos stands but does not move away from the man. Slowly he reaches down and takes the man by his armpits and hoists him up. "What are you doing?" Barrett asks. "They will just keep coming," Anaxos says, his tone flat. Anaxos leans back, bearing the man's weight. And Barrett isn't sure what he's doing until Anaxos grips either side of the man's head and with a sick, popping twist, snaps his neck with a sharp crack. "What the hell, X?" Barrett asks as the man's body slumps to the ground. Anaxos looks at Barrett, his eyes empty and devoid of emotion. "I make a deal with them, but they break it, so deal is off," Anaxos says. He grabs the man by his ankles and drags his body into the surf. Quickly, it's drug out farther and farther until it disappears. "Won't they come looking for him? Won't the plant keep him alive?" Barrett asks as Anaxos begins to walk towards the hut. "Plant will not keep him alive. It will only heal the living. The stories of the dead coming back are just, stories," Anaxos says. His shoulders are slumped as Barrett follows him back to the camp. He's dejected. He seems drained of all emotion as they stumble back into the little camp on the beach. When the rest of the group see them, they come rushing. Daniel begins to pepper them with 1,000 questions, but Anaxos holds up a hand. Barrett finds his clothes still in a pile on the beach and dresses quietly. "Let us rest tonight. We can talk in the morning," he requests, and Daniel shrinks back, but Crystal steps forward. "Can you at least tell us where the boat is?" she asks, and Anaxos plops down in front of the fire, his sopping wet clothes and hair dripping sizzling beads onto the rocks surrounding the flames. "They took it. The others. They have it," Barrett explains, sitting down next to Anaxos. "Seriously? Fuck this. I'm going to bed. Come on, guys," Crystal shrieks, and Barrett doesn't have the strength to go after her. He understood her frustration, but couldn't fathom the idea of standing at that moment. He was so tired. Without realizing it, he leans his head over onto Anaxos' shoulder. Anaxos, for his part, doesn't move. "How did I get back?" he asks after a few minutes of just the sounds of crackling fire. "I pulled you back. You were out cold." He said, "Well, I couldn't leave you out there," Barrett says. Anaxos nods, shivering in the cool night air. Then he moves, standing slowly. He goes to the side of the hut and picks up the rigging that he had fashioned to cook their fish. It was a series of sticks strung up together to sit over top of the fire. He sets the makeshift rack over the flames and unceremoniously shucks his pants to his ankles. He stood maybe 3 feet from Barrett, his back to him. Barrett stares openly for a moment. Like his chest, Anaxos' ass was both toned and hirsute. He had a rather plump, tight backside that led down to wide, muscular thighs and bulbous, strong calves that flexed as he shifted to get out of his pants completely. It was a sight, this close up and in the dying light of the fire. As he begins to turn, Barrett looks down, away from Anaxos and directly into the sand. Anaxos chuckles, the first sign of any emotion since he'd woken up. This makes Barrett smile at the ground. While he was still in shock at the events further down the beach, he still found himself caring for Anaxos. The man throws his pants over the rack, the water dripping from them popping and spitting as it fell. "Have you never seen a man, how do you say it, without clothes?" Anaxos asks, and Barrett laughs. "Oh, I have, just never has it been so unceremonious," he says, and when Anaxos doesn't respond, Barrett realized he must not have understood. "I mean, normally, it's not so easy," he says, and Anaxos lets out another small, amused sound. "You can look, you know. I'm not ashamed," Anaxos says, and Barrett can feel himself blushing. "I don't know that I should," Barrett says down at the ground, a bit of nervousness in his tone. He was finding this exchange between them somehow both erotic and panic-inducing. To Barrett, it felt like a trap. It was obvious to him that Elliot and Anaxos had been lovers once upon a time, but that didn't mean that someone as striking and complicated as Anaxos would be interested in him. Barrett knew he wasn't someone that people were generally interested in. If he hadn't known it before he'd broken up with Mark, his ex-boyfriend had made it abundantly clear when they did break up that he was not someone most people found desirable, mostly due to his nervous, jittery personality. So it made him feel like the flirtation was some form of entrapment. He hears the sound of shifting sand and Anaxos' feet come within his view, his toe just inches from Barrett's outstretched feet. "I will sit down, if it makes you feel better," Anaxos says, a hint of indecipherable emotion in his voice. He moves away and Barrett feels him sit on the log next to him. "Who is Elliot?" Barrett asks, changing the subject. He looks up and thankfully Anaxos was far away that all Barrett could see was an inordinate amount of thigh from the other man, who sighs heavily at the question. He doesn't speak for a while, but when he does, his voice is full of anguish. "We met in the war. He came here to fight alongside us. At first we were nothing to each other, but soon we became more. He was so kind to me, and I fall in love with him. But we could do nothing about it. It was forbidden. Then we come to the island. Here there are no rules, but still we have to be secretive. No one could know. When I told him I wished to leave the others, he would not go with me. He told the others of my plan. They ran me away, and he stayed with them. That was over 100 years ago." Anaxos tells him rather simply, and any details that Anaxos didn't give, Barrett can fill in on his own. "So he's been in that forest, so close to you for over 100 years. And he never came to you? Not once?" Barrett asks. Anaxos shakes his head slowly, and tears spill over the edges of his eyes. Barrett reaches over, putting a hand over Anaxos's on the log that they shared. "That's horrible, X," Barrett says sweetly. Anaxos wipes his face and sniffles. "It's okay. I stopped thinking about him a long time ago. Tonight it reminds me," he says, flipping his hand over to hold Barrett's in earnest. Barrett smiles at the man, and there they sit, listening to the sounds of the forest until Anaxos finally stands, takes his pants down from the rack, dresses, and goes into the hut to sleep. Barrett quickly follows, wondering if there was going to be more of this interaction, or if that would really be it. Maybe the interest was gone, fleeting. He wasn't sure as he slipped into a dreamless slumber, which he hoped for more. Anaxos' strange flirtation, or nothing. What do I like about this chapter? Well, there's a couple things I like. Number one, I like the way that Anaxos just kind of has no emotion when he wakes up. He's drained of emotion. He's just seen this person that he was in love with, who abandoned him for over 100 years, and he snaps someone's neck. And I kind of like that. Not like I like that, but I like that he goes from being this sort of gentle, soft person who only fights when he has to snapping someone's neck for daring to lay a hand on Barrett. Not because he's like in love with Barrett or because he's so enamored with him or anything like that, but because he's so devoid of emotion and these people around him are so othering and horrible that he's just like, you know what? I'm going to snap this guy's neck and throw him out to sea because I've had a bad day. And I've had a bad day because of these people. There's a couple of things about the scene where they're sitting around the fire that I like. Number one, the flirtation. I find it interesting the way that they flirt, and I'll tell you why. I like that it's kind of awkward and strange and like Anaxos pushing towards and Barrett kind of backing away from the flirtation because that's natural sometimes. And I think would be especially natural when you're talking about people being stranded at sea. Like they can't go anywhere, they can't do anything, they're stuck with each other. And so you kind of either have one of two reactions. You're either like, yeah, I'm into this, let's bang it out. Or you're like, no, we probably shouldn't, that's a bad idea. So I like that juxtaposition of the two of them and Barrett being so awkward and uncomfortable that he's like, no, thank you. And that leads me to the next thing that I like, which is when Barrett says it feels like a form of entrapment, this flirtation. When I wrote that, it hit home. I was like, oh, I'm just writing about myself, because my whole adult life, or my whole like romantic life, I shouldn't say adult because I was romantically involved with people as a kid, a teenager. My whole romantic life, I have been like blind to people flirting with me. Not the way I look now, but when I was a little more conventionally attractive, I guess you could say. And people would flirt with me. Like now, looking back on it, I can recognize that people would flirt with me. But at the time, it was like I couldn't see it. And when I did see it, it made me so uncomfortable. Like uncomfortable to the point that I would just like leave a situation if somebody was flirting with me. Because it feels like entrapment to me. It feels like this person's trying to trick me. They're trying to do something to me. They're trying to get me wrapped up into something, because there's no way that they could just be interested in me romantically or like sexually or whatever. There's no way that they're actually flirting with me. It just doesn't make sense. There's literally no way anybody would ever do that. And that is like the feeling that I have always had when somebody does flirt with me, or not even flirting necessarily, but like shows genuine emotional like interest in me. Like, oh, I'm interested in being your friend, or oh, I'm interested in getting to know you better. It just kind of feels like I'm going to get trapped into something, like I'm going to get tricked. It feels like a trick. Does that make sense? Like it always feels like a trick when somebody, especially when somebody is flirting with me. I just feel like this is a trick. They're tricking me somehow. This is how they're going to get me. And I don't know who they are or why somebody would flirt with me to get me in trouble or like trick me. But that's just how it kind of feels when I get flirted with, you know? It's wild. I don't know how to explain it other than it feels like entrapment. Something else that I like about this chapter, I'm trying to focus on things that I do like and not necessarily things that I don't like the way that I stumble over my words sometimes. I don't like that. Or the way that dogs just bark all day and planes fly overhead. I can't control those things. Also, did you see my cat fully climb up on my desk in the middle of me reading the chapter and try and like step on the computers? And I had to just lift him over my head. I love it. But something else that I like is the way that Anaxos flirts, separately from the push and pull aspect of it. The way that he's like unceremonious and not precious about it. He like takes his pants off and turns around and says, you can look at me if you want to. That's so, one, it's bold. Two, we kind of have to suspend a little bit of disbelief and give everyone the benefit of the doubt in this situation, because it is a romance-based novel. It's like an adventure novel, but it's a romance novel. So things like, how do you say it without being problematic? There isn't really a way to say it. When you write a story, there's some parts of it that just kind of go unspoken. So like the idea of this is consensual has to be an unspoken rule in the story unless stated otherwise, because otherwise you're like constantly stating this is consensual, this is consensual. So we're assuming that it's consensual, or at least not unwelcome. And Anaxos just takes his pants off and he's like, you can look at me. You like, obviously you can take an interest in this, and I'm fine with that. And Barrett is just like, no, like I'm good. Now, it's probably been, what, a few months since Barrett has been intimate with a man, intimate with anyone. It's obviously been a much longer time for Anaxos, let's say 100 years, assuming that nobody else washed up on shore in between now and then, which we don't know. But it's been a long time for Anaxos, and he's kind of like, one, he's from a different time. Not to be like, he's from a different generation. He's literally from a different time. Like, time stopped for him 145 or so years ago. So things are a little different for him than they are for Barrett. but I like that nature of just being like, you can look at me. Like, here is me. I'm standing here naked in front of you. Look at me. Like, this is it. Maybe I like that because it's such the antithesis of how I, or me, or my characters, or whoever, that I kind of... Do you hear these fucking dogs barking? Listen. Wait, let me put the microphone up to the window so you can hear what I'm hearing. Oh, they just fucking stopped. Oh, they started again. Listen. Just constantly barking. I don't know why I'm whispering like they're going to hear me. Anyway, so just ignore that if you hear dogs barking. It's not my feed. But I like the way that Anaxos flirts. I find it erotic. I find it interesting. I find it a little bit different than the, like, traditional romance novel type, like, what are they called? Not bodice, is it bodice rippers? Corset rippers? I think they're called bodice rippers, where it's just like the man shows up and rips her. I guess that's why they're called bodice rippers, because there's that like iconic sort of thing where the man shows up and he just rips her bodice open, rips her shirt open, and lays her bare, and he takes charge of her. And I like that Anaxos, instead of doing that or being presumptuous or forward, is just kind of like, you can look at me if you want. I'm standing here giving you the choice to look at me. And Barrett says, I don't know if I should. I don't know if that's a good idea. And I find that interesting. It's not your typical romance novel. It's not your typical reaction to, oh, look at that. You know, if it was the other way around, if it was, say, a story that focused on a feminine protagonist and she was taking her clothes off, then the man would have to show a sense of morality and dignity, and he wouldn't immediately look at her. But the idea that there's two men and that simultaneously they're both expressing the opposite reactions of what men typically do in the romance genre, which is be swashbuckling, like no holds barred, don't need consent type of people on one hand, and then also they're typically like they'll take advantage of any situation they're put into. And here we've got two male characters who are both obviously kind of interested in each other, but don't display any of those actions. They display, in fact, the complete opposite. They're so consensual and so like timid and soft in a way that's erotic. Like, it's filled with tension in it, but it's erotic and it's kind of sweet. I don't know. I like it. I think it's fun. I think it's a different twist on what we're used to with romance novels or bodice rippers or whatever you call them. Like your Harlequin romance novel. It's different than that because everybody's not just like ripping their clothes off and running at each other. It's more like, I don't know, playing an actual game where people go back and forth trying to get at each other, not just like they're not together and then all of a sudden they're together. It's like, are we together? Are we not together? Are we? Aren't we? I like that. I think it's a little bit different, and it's different than other things that I've written, like the Wells House phenomenon. That was like a whole, I don't know what I was going through, but that was like a whole experiment in pushing the boundaries of like what is consensual or what is messing with somebody's mind and not messing with somebody's mind. What is like, is weird. I don't know what I was doing. Is it salvageable? I don't know. I really don't know if it's salvageable. But we just call it love. It was just kind of like they fell in together and immediately they were attracted to each other. Within the first like 10 chapters, they're saying, I love you. These characters are 14, 15, 16, 17 chapters in, and they're still like, do we like each other? Do we not like each other? I don't know. I guess the Wells House phenomenon, there was sort of that, like, but it was more between Warren, that was his name, Warren, the main character, and Thomas, the other brother. It was kind of that will they, won't they between the two of them, and not necessarily between him and the other main brother, whose name I can't remember. I need to treat myself better. I need to read my stuff more often. And then there's also Drabble, which still doesn't have a title. Still don't have a title for it. In which we follow a teenager who just kind of is like, yeah, everyone falls in love with him somehow. Like everybody wants to fuck him. And this story is like the opposite of all that, where the characters are just kind of, one's pushing, one's pulling, then the other one's kind of pulling towards, but only when the other one's not looking. And then as soon as the other one's looking, he's like, no, I'm not interested. I think it's fun. So I'll be back next week with a new chapter. Sorry to cut it off there, but my neighbors are home. I have things to do. It's late. I had to work late today. It was awful. I'm having a hard time. If you're interested in catching up with any of the other stuff I do, you can catch this. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can listen to it anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you're listening to it, you can watch it on YouTube. You can visit my Etsy shop, The Floor Rejects, on Etsy. There are some of my drawings. I've been working on digital oil paintings, and I think they're pretty cool. I think they're neat. They're different than what I've been doing. And I think that's, and on Twitter, you can follow me on Twitter, at Floor Rejects on Twitter, and let me know what you do or don't like. I don't know. I am going to share this with my 5 loyal listeners, because I literally know that there's 5 of you because my app every week tells me 5 listeners. That's it. And that's okay. I'm grateful that you're here, but I am going to tell you, I'm starting to feel like I am shouting into the void. And not that you are the void, but it feels like I'm putting all this effort into something and it's starting to feel like a job, and I'm not seeing any results. And by results, I don't mean like I want to be YouTube famous, but like I started this podcast to get feedback, to get critique, and I've gotten a little bit of feedback. Mostly from family members, in which they're like, I tried to listen to it. Either I don't know how to listen to podcasts, or I wasn't very interested. And that's tough to hear. That's tough to hear, that the thing that you're interested in or that you're writing, people aren't interested in. That's hard to hear. And then I got 1 rating on the Apple iTunes. Jesus, what am I, 70? The iTunes like rating section on podcasts, and it was a 4-star rating, and the person just said, I'm interested to see how this goes, not sure why somebody would accept $500,000 a year as payment to not have to do anything and be stuck in a house. And then they said, not sure what my price would be. And I just thought that was fucking hilarious. I wasn't even upset that it was a 4-star review from someone who had obviously just kind of listened to 1 chapter and decided that's what they had to say. But I thought it was hilarious that they were like, not sure what my price would be. Like, some people's prices are different. Mine would probably be $500,000 a year and a house and property and all the staff that I could need. Call me crazy, but that sounds like a pretty good life. And oh no, I can't go on vacation. People have to come to me and stay at my giant manor. Oh no, I don't know. If you're still listening out there, go change it to a 5-star review, because I've only got 3 of them. I've only got 3 reviews. I don't know why I'm telling you this. I think sometimes I get a little too honest, but I'll be back next week, hopefully, with a new chapter of the Isle of Artemisia. We've been having a series of good luck here where our chapters are taking us somewhere. Something is happening in every single chapter. Hopefully that continues. But either way, I've been your friendly neighborhood author, Jonathan, and this has been the Floor Rejects podcast. Bye.